Men, I can show you how to restore your youth and how to keep it. A health belt man cannot grow old. He must be young forever. Years count for nothing in this life so long as you have great vitality. Weakness, nervousness, unmanliness are conditions to be laughed at by the intelligent user of my great appliance, for it gives in abundance all that vim, vigor, and nerve force which the weakened system craves. Worn every night and all night for 2 or 3 months, it sends a great, warm, glowing volume of electricity into your body through the nerve centers at the small of the back. From the first hour's use, you experience a decided benefit. There is a great mysterious force which gets right to work. No drugs to be taken, no conditions imposed except that dissipation must cease. Help nature that much, the belt will do the rest. It takes the weakness and kink out of your back. It drives rheumatic pains away from all parts of the body. You will feel and look young and strong again. Women and men noticing your physical change will be more attracted toward you on account of your new vitality and life. In 2 months, you can experience the full vigor of perfect manhood. Charles L. Snell of Middleport, New York writes, "Your health belt cured me of nervous debility, lost vigor, kidney and bladder troubles after all else failed." This is but one testimonial among thousands which you may see if you care to. Send for my book, which describes my health belt and contains much health information. It includes a private treatise for men only on the topic of strength. Mail your request to Dr. Alfred Sandon Company, 1151 Broadway, New York City.
You ask me what we need to win this war. I answer, tobacco, as much as bullets. Guess who said that and when? It's a World War I quote from General John J. Pershing, leader of the U.S. Expeditionary Force, and he wasn't exaggerating. Obviously, the boys in the trenches needed bullets and food. Here's a description of the rations they received. The reserve ration was first issued during the latter part of World War I to feed troops who were away from a garrison or field kitchen. It originally consisted of 12 ounces of fresh bacon or 1 pound of canned meat, known as the meat ration, usually corned beef. Additionally, 2 8-ounce cans of hard bread or hardtack biscuits, a packet of 1.16 ounces of pre-ground coffee, a packet of 2.4 ounces of granulated sugar, and a packet of 0.16 ounces of salt were issued. Rations were pretty much the same whether provided by Uncle Sam for the U.S. troops or for the UK government for soldiers from Britain, Australia, and so on. But both the U.S. and UK decided early on that bacon, bread, and coffee wasn't enough to fortify the troops for battle. There was also a separate tobacco ration of 0.4 ounces of tobacco and 10 cigarette rolling papers, later replaced by brand name machine-rolled cigarettes. Here's a package of rations for the front lines of the U.S. Notice the little container labeled cigarettes. And here's a UK package. You can tell because it includes a pack of Woodbine cigarettes, a very popular brand in the United Kingdom. And thus, by the end of the war, 14 million cigarettes a day were being distributed to the doughboys. Before the Great War, men in America had been partial to pipes, cigars, and chewing tobacco. Smoking cigarettes was considered in many circles to be a sign of effeminacy. It was a habit affected by dandies, maybe, but not real men. Still, tobacco and its nicotine kick were considered valuable in helping to calm nerves and psychologically lighten hardships. With our men facing trench warfare, gas attacks, tanks, suffering, serious injury, and possibly death, Uncle Sam considered the least he could do is provide them with the comfort of tobacco. As it turned out, the easiest and most convenient form in which to distribute it and use it in the trenches was the cigarette. Thus, the cigarette quickly lost its reputation as being for sissies. I didn't understand until I looked it up recently that the smoke from pipe tobacco and cigars had not traditionally been inhaled into the lungs. The type of tobacco used in cigars and pipes was, and evidently still is, very harsh on delicate tissue and would immediately lead to coughing and gagging. The idea, I guess, is to kind of roll around the smoke in your mouth and then poof it out. I found both cigar smokers forums and pipe smokers forums on the internet where guys were discussing the process and warning newbies not to inhale, but instead just savor the flavors of the tobacco in the mouth. Thus, nicotine would be absorbed primarily from the lining of the mouth. But in 1913, just shortly before World War I, the R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company introduced the Camel cigarette. The new Camels were made from a blend of different tobaccos, cured in a way which made them mild enough to allow the smoke to be deeply inhaled. This 1915 ad explained how different this new kind of cigarette was. Inhalation results in nicotine speeding to the brain. It wasn't long before regular daily use became the norm for many cigarette smokers as more and more became addicted. And as you can imagine, with smoking being just about the only recreation for the soldiers in the trenches during the war, millions of them came home from that war addicted to cigarette smoking. In fact, many of them came home with a preference for one or another of the brands of cigarettes, probably whatever brand was in their rations. Like this man, enthusiastic about smoking Chesterfields. You see, the tobacco companies were more than happy to do their patriotic duty and provide cigarettes to the troops at or below cost, as long as they were distributed in their branded packages. The government provided 50 cigarettes per week in the actual ration kits, and canteens across Europe also allowed soldiers to buy as many more cigarettes as they needed, at or below their wholesale price. Evidently, the government agreed with the tobacco companies to distribute the various brands in the same proportion as their place in the market back in the United States. By the way, as mentioned, it wasn't just the American soldier who needed tobacco. The other allies made sure their boys' nicotine needs were taken care of too. And those boys made sure the folks back home knew that they'd be even happier to receive a care package with extra smokes than to get a box of Mom's homemade cookies, as you can see from this New Zealand postcard of the time. Woodbines were a popular United Kingdom brand of cigarettes. Noted for its strong, unfiltered cigarettes, the brand was cheap and popular in the early 20th century with the working class, as well as with army men during the First and Second World War. They were nicknamed gaspers because new smokers found their harsh smoke difficult to inhale. Yes, as General Pershing said, smokes were recognized as being as vital as bullets to the war effort. And the American tobacco companies were happy to oblige. Many, if not most, soldiers returned home addicted to nicotine from all the generously supplied free cigarettes from the tobacco companies. The industry had huge numbers of guaranteed lifelong customers at that point. By 1928, 10 years after the war, cigarette sales were prosperous and going up all the time. But there was just one problem. Most of the sales were to men, since they were the ones addicted to smoking from their wartime experience. The percentage of the market being sold to women was very minor.
Ladies. In appearance, harnesses' electric corsets do not differ from those usually worn. As you can see from the illustration, they are made of the very same material, best quality, in the latest style and most approved shapes. They are, in fact, the very thing for ladies, young or old, especially those who suffer from weak back, chills, rheumatism, hysteria, internal complaints, loss of appetite, nervous dyspepsia, kidney disorders, rheumatic and organic affections, ladies' ailments, biliousness, and so on. By wearing this perfectly designed corset, the most awkward figure becomes graceful and elegant. The internal organs are speedily strengthened. The chest is aided in its healthy development, and the entire system is invigorated. Send orders and inquiries to the Medical Battery Company Limited, 52 Oxford Street, London, West.
With most of the young men in America hooked on cigarettes after the war, but few women joining them, this left cigarette makers convinced that the time was ripe to open a second front, this time targeting females. In 1928, George Washington Hill, head of the American Tobacco Company, which made America's fastest-growing brand of cigarettes, Lucky Strikes, became obsessed by the prospect of winning over the large potential female market for Luckies. He told an associate at the time, "If I can crack that market, I'll get more than my share of it. It will be like opening a new gold mine right in your front yard." Hill did crack that market. American Tobacco's revenues rose by $32 million that year. Hill exulted in a December 1928 letter to an associate that Lucky's had shown a greater increase than all other cigarettes combined. But of course, most middle-class women of the time did not live lives of adventure and high risk. Offering them a smoke to calm their frazzled nerves wouldn't be smart psychology. Hill decided that the biggest lure he could use for women would be to promise them that smoking Luckies would help them be attractive. In the flapper era of the 1920s, the slim figure for women was becoming the standard of beauty, and women were becoming conscious of the role overeating played in ruining their slender ideal. So Hill decided to sell the idea that smoking a cigarette was the most effective way to avoid eating excess calories. Hill had already settled on a slogan he wanted to use: "Reach for a Lucky instead of a sweet." But what methods was he going to use to sell that slogan to his target audience? Would just a barrage of magazine ads do the trick? Or would a much more clever and sophisticated plan be necessary? That's the question we are examining in this case of Lucky Eddie, and this is where that Lucky Eddie comes in. Eddie in this case was Eddie Bernays, often dubbed the father of public relations. Eddie invented the term public relations, or PR, in the early 1900s and developed many of the main concepts of the trade being used clear up to today. Eddie was a genius at using tricks of the trade to sell everything from groceries to political candidates. His services were highly sought out by advertisers, and he was paid very well for his advice and insights. To bring his plan to life, Hill turned to the 36-year-old Bernays, whom he'd been paying $25,000 a year for some time just to be available for consultation and advice. Don't underestimate that amount. The equivalent purchasing power in 2024 dollars, considering inflation, would be over $400,000. Eddie's reputation for increasing the profits of his clients allowed him to name his own price. Hill made a wise choice. Bernays didn't invent fashion trends like the pursuit of a slender figure, but he was becoming the acknowledged master of accentuating such trends and capitalizing on them for his clients, a process he termed crystallizing public opinion, as seen here in the title of his first book, written in 1923. During his 8-year association with Hill's Tobacco Company and Lucky Strike cigarettes, Eddie would make clear his willingness to employ whatever antics or deceptions it took to do that crystallizing, including trying to discredit new research linking smoking to deadly diseases, which included using ads that implied enthusiastic doctors promoting smoking Luckies. In earlier ad campaigns for other clients, Bernays had discovered the power of enlisting experts to endorse ideas that would be beneficial in promoting a product. So his first tactic to help promote Lucky Strikes was to start a buzz among experts who could endorse the idea that slim is in. His photographer friend, Nicholas Murray, was persuaded to write to other photographers and artists and solicit their opinions on the new, more slender woman as the modern feminine ideal. I have come to the conclusion, Murray wrote, that the slender woman, who combining suppleness and grace with slenderness, who instead of overeating sweets and desserts, lights a cigarette, as the advertisements say, has created a new standard of female loveliness. I am interested in knowing if my own judgment concurs with that of others and should be most happy to have your opinion on this subject. Who could argue that thin wasn't better than fat? Few did, and the results were forwarded to newspapers with similar surveys readied for actors, athletes, beautiful girls, society women, and male dancers. Eddie hit the topic from many angles. He concocted news releases to send to fashion editors of magazines and newspapers that featured slender Parisian models in all the latest high-fashion dresses. He circulated to news editors a testimonial from the former chief of the British Association of Medical Officers of Health, warning that sweets cause tooth decay and advising that the correct way to finish a meal is with fruit, coffee, and a cigarette. The fruit, Dr. George F. Buchan continued, hardens the gums and cleans the teeth. The coffee stimulates the flow of saliva in the mouth and acts as a mouthwash, while finally the cigarette disinfects the mouth and soothes the nerves. He just forgot to include a statement that it also helps you stay skinny. And then there was the testimonial and ads from Moses Teichmann. You don't remember Moses? Here he is with his snappy bow tie. Born to Jewish parents in 1895 in Austria-Hungary, Moses and family emigrated to the U.S. in 1897. Anti-German pressure at the beginning of World War I prompted him to change his name because the anti-German sentiments abroad in the land made things difficult for people with German-sounding names like Teichmann. So instead of Moses Teichmann, he chose to live the rest of his life as Arthur Murray. If you're old enough, you may remember Murray for his Arthur Murray Dance Party TV show in the 1950s. If you're older than that, you may remember him from the mail-order dance lessons he sent out that used footprint diagrams to teach folks to do the foxtrot or waltz. But he was most famous for a chain of dance studios he started in 1925 and that continue to this day. The process involves selling branded dance lessons through franchising. For instance, he trained dance instructors for the Statler Hotel chain, who then went to various hotels and gave lessons. Murray kept some of the profits from each franchise. By the 1930s, he expanded even more to freestanding franchise dance studios. I had a widowed aunt in her 50s who signed up for one of the dance studios in Dayton, Ohio in the 1950s, went regularly for classes, and ended up meeting there and marrying a man her age who was a perfect match for her. In fact, I'm pretty sure many, if not most of the people going there, were going there more to meet possible mates than to learn the cha-cha. Murray Studios were the precursor to dating apps today. But in 1928, when Eddie approached Murray, he was already a nationally known dance instructor in a time when new dance crazes like the Charleston and Jitterbug were all the rage, and being able to look good on the dance floor was viewed by young women as a quick road to popularity.
Fire in the middle. Heartbeat, warm as griddle. Heartbeat, sizzling soup. Oh, what will I do? Like chili bop bop bop. Heartbeat, stinging like a busy bee. Drop beat, smoke like a chimney. Hot heat, burning terribly, nearly makes a furnace out of me. Heartbeat, and on what I mean, hot, 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 hot. White heat, that's the way they have got. No, no, no. Hot feet, hot feet, Charleston's doing hot feet, shot feet, black bottom ruined 'em. Hot feet, hear him yell, oh, what's so hot heat?
Bernays persuaded Murray to sign a letter testifying that, quote, on the dance floor, results of overindulgence are quickly revealed, causing embarrassment not only to one's dancing partner, but also to other dancers by encroaching on more than a fair share of space on a crowded, or, as is often the case, on a dance floor of limited proportions. Dancers today, when tempted to overindulge at a punch bowl or the buffet, reach for a cigarette instead. Eddie also embarked on less direct approaches aimed at changing the culture even more than changing the habits of one potential Lucky Strike buyer at a time. Hotels were urged to add cigarettes to their dessert lists, while the Bernays office widely distributed a series of menus prepared by an editor of House and Garden designed to save you from the dangers of overeating. For lunch and dinner, they suggested a sensible mix of vegetables, meats, and carbohydrates, followed by the advice to reach for a cigarette instead of dessert. Eddie proposed that homemakers hire kitchen cabinet makers to provide special spaces to hold cigarettes the same way as they did for flour and sugar, urged container makers to provide labeled tins for smokes just as they did for tea and coffee, and he encouraged home economics writers to stress the importance of cigarettes in homemaking. Quote, just as the young and inexperienced housewife is cautioned not to let her supplies of sugar or salt or tea or coffee run low, so she should be advised that the same holds true of cigarettes. The reach for a Lucky instead of a sweet ads have been around for about a month when a new wave of ads came out, this time stressing moderation. The moderation he had in mind, of course, meant consuming fewer sweets and more cigarettes. The slogan for this wave of the sales campaign was, when tempted to overindulge, reach for a Lucky instead. As you can see, the kicker in these ads was the future shadow. And as usual, Eddie outdid himself brainstorming on ways to expand the plan. Another gimmick Hill loved that Eddie came up with was to sign up the glamorous Ziegfeld Follies girls to form a club. 6 of the dancers formed the Ziegfeld Contour, Curve, and Charm Club, signing a pledge to, quote, renounce the false pleasure of the table, fattening foods, drinks, and cloying sweets. But I make no sacrifices. I shall smoke cigarettes. And it wasn't all just glamour girls who were enlisted in the sales blitz. One of the most popular female celebrities of the time was aviatrix Amelia Earhart. Charles Lindbergh had recently completed his famous solo flight across the Atlantic in 1927 when Earhart was invited to take part in a June 1928 flight that also became a first, the first woman to cross the Atlantic in an airplane. No, she wasn't the pilot, just along for the ride on the plane Friendship. The flight was almost totally on instruments, and she hadn't yet been trained for that type of flying. But it was known that she was an accomplished pilot, and she went on to fame in her own right. Conveniently for Lucky Eddie and Lucky Strikes, Amelia had a slim, trim figure. Here she is in flight gear in 1928, and more demure and feminine in formal attire in 1932. So they could easily capitalize on her friendship trip that came right in the middle of their Lucky campaign. Yes, Amelia gave testimony that Lucky Strikes were the cigarette of choice on the famous flight, and that she, the pilot and co-pilot, basically chain-smoked them for most of the 20-hour trip. As she was quoted saying in another Lucky ad of the time, I think nothing helps so much to lessen the strain for all of us.
Ladies and gentlemen, are there parts of your body that have unsightly excess flesh preventing you from looking your best? Have you been frustrated that you have been unable to find a solution to the problem through exercise or dieting? Dr. Walter's famous medicated rubber garments are the solution you have been looking for. The garments are very comfortable and guaranteed to accomplish the desired result. They are worn by the royalty of Europe and the Society of America, and they can give you the same results. The neck and chin bands shown in the illustration will treat excess flesh of such problems as the double chin and flabby neck for only $3 for the set. You can also get a band just for the chin and garments for all the other parts of your body. Dr. Walter's medicated garment collection includes union suits, jackets, stockings, and more. Reduce unwanted flesh anywhere desired. They also are an invaluable aid to those suffering from rheumatism. Visit or send for more information today from Dr. Jean Walter, Suite 1215, 51 West 33rd Street, New York.
How did the author of the Father of Spin book ferret out so many details and verbatim quotes about the Lucky Strike and many other Bernays campaigns of persuasion from so long ago? Because Eddie Bernays was both egotistical and obsessive-compulsive enough to keep originals or copies of practically every slip of paper he ever wrote or received. And with a career that spanned over 80 years, that's a lot of paper. Eddie was literally sure that his would be an undying legacy, and he wanted to make sure future biographers got it right. So before his death, he boxed up all of that voluminous material and arranged for it to be left to the Library of Congress, more than 800 boxes. He also wrote his own 849-page autobiography, Biography of an Idea, Memoirs of Public Relations Counsel Edward L. Bernays. But even that wasn't enough. He felt it was important that biographers and historians also have a roadmap to everything he'd written and everything that had written about him over his long career, one that included capsule versions of the writings, since he'd learned long before that busy authors had limited attention spans. So in a truly unusual move, he hired a doctoral student to compile a 774-page annotated bibliography on him and his wife Doris. This work, Public Relations, the Edward L. Bernayses, and the American Scene, a bibliography, included 24 pages and 185 entries just on things the New York Times had said about him. There were hundreds of pages more of long excerpts from each book, periodical, and film that mentioned him or that he contributed to. And there were references to nearly every speech he delivered and letter to the editor he wrote. Here are just a few samples of what would have been collected in those boxes and recorded in the books. I gleaned these from a search on Eddie's name on the newspapers.com website, but I'm sure Eddie had his own copies of these stashed away for posterity. This 1936 clipping regarding a lecture he gave about the topic of propaganda is particularly telling regarding Eddie's views. Here's the summary of what he said. Properly handled, propaganda is a blessing rather than an evil. Freedom of propaganda is as important as other civil liberties, such as freedom of the press, freedom of worship, freedom of the radio, and freedom of assembly. Very few copies of the book were sold to the public as it was such an esoteric topic. Thus, Eddie was stuck with 25 cases of copies, which he kept in his basement. But the bibliography found its way to scores of libraries and other research centers and is available to anyone interested in reading or writing about him. And thus, it really did have a significant influence on society. Seldom, if ever, had a publicity campaign been carried out on so many fronts, and seldom, if ever again, will those responsible save and make public the details of their orchestrations the way Bernays did when he left to the Library of Congress 24 boxes of records pertaining just to the American Tobacco Company. Yes, Lucky Eddie was close to one of a kind. which is why we know so much about the Lucky Strike campaign.